before civilization, long before cities rose from riverbanks, before writing marked clay tablets, before metal reshaped tools and weapons. Humans lived entirely within the rhythms of the natural world. For the vast majority of our species' existence, there were no permanent structures, no walls, no institutions, only landscape, climate, movement, and survival shaped by the environment itself. These early humans did not live in villages or settlements as we imagine them today. They lived in ecosystems. Open savannas stretched across eastern Africa, dotted with acacia trees and seasonal watering holes. River valleys provided more stable food sources. Rocky outcroppings and shallow caves offered temporary shelter against wind or predators. Life was mobile because resources were mobile. Rainfall shifted, herds migrated, edible plants ripened and withered in cycles. To survive, humans moved with them. Population density was extraordinarily low. Small bands of perhaps 20 to 50 individuals formed the basic social unit. These groups were likely composed of extended families, parents, children, siblings, grandparents, cousins, bound together not by law or property, but by cooperation and shared necessity. There were no centralized governments or kings. Leadership may have existed, but it was situational, based on experience, hunting skill, age, or wisdom, rather than inherited authority. The archaeological record provides quiet but powerful insight into how these early humans lived. Stone tools discovered across Africa from the Middle Stone Age reveal increasing sophistication in design. These were not crude rocks randomly broken apart. They were intentionally shaped through a process known as knapping, striking stone at precise angles to produce sharp flakes and cutting edges. Points were crafted for spears. Scrapers were shaped for processing hides. Blades allowed meat to be removed cleanly from bone. Tool-making required planning and knowledge. Certain types of stone, such as flint or obsidian, were selected because they fractured predictably. Early humans recognized this quality and sought it out, sometimes transporting raw material over considerable distances. This suggests foresight and communication within groups, the sharing of techniques and instruction across generations. Food acquisition was diverse and flexible. Early humans were hunter-gatherers, meaning they relied on both animal protein and plant-based foods. Isotope analysis of fossilized remains indicates the diet varied widely depending on environment. Coastal populations consumed fish and shellfish. Inland groups hunted antelope, wild cattle, and smaller game. Plant foods, roots, nuts, fruits, seeds, likely formed a substantial portion of daily caloric intake, particularly gathered by women and children. Contrary to common assumption, life was not constant desperation. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, such as the Hadza of Tanzania or the San of southern Africa, suggest that subsistence activities often occupied only part of the day. Once food needs were met, time remained for social interaction, tool repair, rest, and storytelling. Survival required skill, but it did not necessarily require endless labor. Fire became central to human life during this era. evidence suggests that controlled use of fire predates Homo sapiens, but habitual and widespread fire use expanded dramatically with our species. Fire extended daylight hours, provided warmth in cooler climates, deterred predators, and transformed food through cooking. Cooking increased caloric availability and made certain foods easier to digest, potentially contributing to long-term evolutionary advantages. The presence of fire also changed social structure. Night was no longer entirely dark. Groups gathered around flames, creating circles of light within vast landscapes. Within those circles, communication likely deepened. Language, though invisible in the archaeological record, must have grown increasingly complex to coordinate hunts, pass on survival knowledge, and maintain group cohesion. Early humans were deeply attentive to their surroundings. They read tracks in dust. They recognized subtle differences in plant leaves that signaled edibility or toxicity. They understood animal migration routes and seasonal weather patterns. Knowledge of territory was intimate and experiential. There were no written maps, only memory and shared oral transmission. Burial evidence from sites such as Kafze Cave in Israel suggests that early humans may have practiced intentional burial as early as 100,000 years ago. Bodies were placed carefully, sometimes accompanied by grave goods such as tools or red ochre pigment. While interpretations vary, such acts imply symbolic thinking, perhaps even early spiritual or ritual behavior. Death was not ignored, it was acknowledged. Cognitive complexity also appears in artistic expression. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, engraved ochre pieces dating to roughly 75,000 years ago display geometric patterns. Shell beads found at the same site indicate personal adornment. These artifacts suggest that early humans were capable of abstraction, identity signaling, and possibly shared symbolic meaning. Migration began gradually. Around 60,000 to 70,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began dispersing out of Africa. Genetic studies confirm that modern non-African populations descend from these migratory waves. Movement likely followed coastal routes and river systems where food was reliable. The process was not a single exodus, but a series of gradual expansions across generations. These migrations required adaptability. As humans entered colder climates, clothing became essential. Bone needles discovered in Siberia and Europe suggest sewn garments existed at least 40,000 years ago. Shelter designs evolved to suit environment. In Ice Age Europe, structures built from mammoth bones and covered in hides provided insulation against harsh winters. Yet even as environments changed dramatically, the core structure of life remained consistent. Small groups, shared resources, mobility, and intimate environmental knowledge. There was no agriculture, no surplus storage on large scale, no permanent architecture. Human life was interwoven with landscape in a way that would later become rare. The world was immense and largely unknown beyond walking distance. But within each group's territory, knowledge was precise. Early humans did not conquer nature, they navigated it. They survived through observation, cooperation, and adaptability. For nearly 95% of our species' existence, this was how humans lived. Not in cities, not behind walls, but under open skies, within ecosystems, guided by seasons and firelight. And in that long, quiet span of time, before civilization, the foundations of humanity were laid. The hunter and the gatherer. Daily life for early humans was structured not by clocks or calendars, but by light, temperature, and availability. Morning began with assessment. The sky, the wind, the movement of animals, the location of water. There were no fixed schedules, yet life followed predictable rhythms shaped by season and terrain. Hunter-gatherer societies depended on flexibility. Survival required reading the landscape continuously and adjusting behavior accordingly. If herds moved, the group moved. If drought reduced water sources, routes shifted. Nothing was static. Adaptation was not innovation. It was necessity. Division of labor likely existed, but not in rigid hierarchies. Evidence from both archaeology and ethnographic parallels suggests that adult men often focused on large game hunting, while women gathered plant foods, small animals, nuts, fruits, and roots. This division was efficient rather than ideological. Gathered foods often provided a steady and reliable caloric base, while hunting yielded high protein returns when successful. Hunting required planning and cooperation. Large animals such as aurochs, deer, or mammoth could not be taken down by a single individual. Hunters tracked movement patterns, studied wind direction, and used terrain strategically. Spears, initially thrusting weapons and later thrown projectiles, allowed distance between hunter and prey. Over time, technologies such as the atlatl increased range and force, enhancing success rates. Stone toolkits became increasingly specialized. Archaeological sites from the Upper Paleolithic show blade technologies, burins for carving bone, and microliths used in composite tools. Tools were not universal. They were adapted to environment and task. A coastal group's toolkit differed from that of an inland hunting band. Gathering demanded equal knowledge. Edible plants were not obvious to the untrained eye. Seasonal cycles determined availability. Knowledge of toxic species, medicinal roots, and nutritional value was passed through observation and oral instruction. Children learned by watching adults closely, gradually participating in tasks as ability increased. Shelter varied by climate. In warmer regions, simple windbreaks or brush structures sufficed. In colder Ice Age Europe, evidence from sites such as Mezhyrich in Ukraine reveals dwellings constructed from mammoth bones, arranged in circular patterns and covered with hides. These were not permanent villages, but structured seasonal camps. Clothing became increasingly sophisticated as humans expanded into colder climates. Scraped hides were softened with stone tools. Bone needles, some dating back more than 40,000 years, suggest fitted garments rather than simple draped skins. Proper clothing extended mobility into harsher regions and improved survival rates. Mobility defined early human existence. groups did not accumulate large quantities of possessions. Objects had to be carried. Storage was minimal. Campsites were reused seasonally, but rarely fortified or expanded permanently. Resource management depended on movement rather than ownership. Social structures appear to have been largely egalitarian. Anthropological comparisons with contemporary hunter-gatherers suggest strong norms against hoarding. Sharing food reduced risk. Generosity enhanced reputation and reinforced group cohesion. Authority, when present, likely derived from skill, experience, or wisdom, rather than coercion. Conflict existed, but large-scale organized warfare appears rare in early Paleolithic contexts. Skeletal remains sometimes show trauma consistent with interpersonal violence, yet evidence of mass battlefield events becomes more common only after sedentary agricultural societies emerged. Mobility and low population density reduced sustained territorial conflict. Art and symbolic expression flourished during this period. Cave paintings in Chauvet, Lascaux, and Altamira, some over 30,000 years old, depict animals with remarkable anatomical accuracy. These were not decorative doodles. They required preparation. Pigments derived from ochre and charcoal, controlled lighting, and intentional placement deep within caves. The purpose of these images remains debated. They may have held ritual significance, storytelling value, or functioned as part of social cohesion. What is clear is that early humans possessed imagination and abstraction equal to our own. Handprints preserved in caves offer particularly intimate evidence. Individuals pressed pigment-coated hands against stone walls, leaving negative impressions. These marks remain among the most direct physical connections to early human presence. Silent acknowledgements of existence across tens of thousands of years. Music likely accompanied daily life. Bone flutes discovered in Germany, dating to approximately 40,000 years ago, demonstrate melodic capability. Rhythm may have been created with percussion instruments made from wood or hide. Music strengthens social bonds and aids memory transmission. It likely served similar functions in early communities. Night brought a different tempo. Firelight created communal spaces. Predators were kept at bay, and darkness was softened. Storytelling likely flourished during these hours. Oral tradition was essential for knowledge transfer. Migration routes, animal behavior, medicinal plants, group history. Children were raised collectively. Cooperative breeding models suggest that not only parents, but extended kin contributed to child rearing. Grandparents may have played particularly important roles, transferring survival knowledge accumulated over decades. Early humans were deeply attuned to environmental cues. They observed lunar cycles, animal breeding seasons, and plant growth patterns. Though formal astronomy did not yet exist, patterns in the sky would have been noticed. The stars moved predictably. The moon changed shape in regular intervals. Such observations likely shaped early myth and storytelling traditions. Trade networks may have existed in rudimentary form. Obsidian tools found far from their geological source suggest exchange systems over hundreds of miles. These exchanges were not commercial in the modern sense, but represent connection between distant groups. Population numbers remain small. Estimates suggest that even as late as 10,000 years ago, global human population likely did not exceed a few million. The Earth was vast, quiet, and largely unmarked by permanent human structures. Early human life was not primitive in intellect. It was highly adapted. Survival required memory, coordination, patience, and long-term planning. Every decision carried consequence. When to move camp, when to pursue prey, when to conserve energy. The hunter and the gatherer were not roles of dominance and subordination. They were complementary functions within a shared system of survival. Each depended on the other. For tens of thousands of years, this balance sustained humanity. Long before agriculture, before cities, before written law, early humans lived in small, mobile communities shaped by cooperation and environmental knowledge. And in that balance, between movement and rest, between hunt and harvest, the human story continued to unfold, crossing the world. Between roughly 60,000 and 15,000 years ago, early humans expanded across nearly every habitable region of the planet. This movement did not occur as a single migration, nor as a unified expedition, but as a gradual unfolding across generations. Small groups separated from larger ones, followed resources into unfamiliar terrain, and continued outward. Over time, these incremental steps reshaped the human map of the world. Genetic evidence provides one of the clearest windows into this expansion. Modern non-African populations trace ancestry to a small group of Homo sapiens who left Africa approximately 60,000 to 70,000 years ago. The reasons for departure were likely ecological rather than ideological. Climate fluctuations created new corridors of movement. Lower sea levels exposed land bridges. Food scarcity in one region may have pushed exploration into another. Migration followed geography. Coastal routes were attractive because they offered consistent access to marine food sources. River valleys provided water, vegetation, and animal life. Groups likely moved in stages, settling temporarily in favorable areas before expanding further. Each movement was measured not in miles per day, but in lifetimes. By 50,000 years ago, humans had reached Australia. This achievement required intentional water crossings. Even during periods of lower sea levels, reaching Sahul, the combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea, required sea travel of dozens of kilometers. This suggests early humans possessed both planning capacity and basic watercraft technology. These crossings were not accidental drifts. They required coordinated effort. By 40,000 years ago, humans were well established throughout much of Europe and Asia. In Europe, they encountered Neanderthals, a closely related hominin species who had occupied the region for hundreds of thousands of years. For several thousand years, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals coexisted. Genetic studies confirm interbreeding occurred. Modern populations outside Africa retain small percentages of Neanderthal DNA. Climate shaped every decision. The late Pleistocene era was defined by glacial cycles. During the last glacial maximum, approximately 26,000 to 19,000 years ago, massive ice sheets covered large portions of North America and Northern Europe. Sea levels dropped more than 100 meters below modern levels. Landscapes transformed. Forests gave way to tundra. Migration routes opened and closed depending on ice coverage. Humans adapted rather than retreated. In colder regions, clothing became more refined. Bone needles, discovered in Siberia and Europe, suggest tailored garments designed for insulation. Fur-lined boots and layered hides would have been necessary for survival in sub-zero climates. Shelter construction improved accordingly. Archaeological sites in Ukraine reveal circular dwellings constructed from mammoth bones and covered with hides, insulated structures capable of withstanding harsh winters. Technology advanced steadily. Blade-based stone industries replaced earlier flake systems in many regions. Composite tools emerged, combining stone points with wooden shafts and binding materials. Adhesives derived from plant resins and birch tar were used to secure tool components. These developments required planning, experimentation, and shared knowledge. The domestication of dogs appears during this migratory era. Evidence suggests that wolves began associating with human groups at least 15,000 to 30,000 years ago. The relationship was mutually beneficial. Wolves drawn to camps by discarded bones gradually became less fearful. Humans benefited from enhanced hunting assistance and early warning systems. Over time, selective tolerance evolved into domestication. The dog may have been humanity's first companion species. Migration into the Americas remains an area of active research. Most evidence supports entry via the Bering Land Bridge, which connected Siberia and Alaska during periods of lower sea levels. This crossing likely occurred between 15,000 and 20,000 years ago, though some evidence suggests earlier presence. Once in the Americas, human groups spread rapidly southward, adapting to diverse ecosystems from Arctic tundra to tropical forests. Population numbers remained low relative to modern standards. Even as humans reached every continent except Antarctica, global population may have remained below 10 million. Vast territories existed between groups. Contact between distant populations was rare, but regional exchange networks began to form. Obsidian artifacts found far from volcanic sources indicate trade or exchange systems stretching hundreds of kilometers. Marine shells discovered inland suggest symbolic value and long-distance interaction. These networks were not commercial markets, but pathways of shared materials and ideas. Cultural expression diversified alongside geographic spread. Cave art flourished in Europe, while rock art traditions emerged in Australia and Africa. Portable figurines carved from ivory or stone, such as the so-called Venus figurines of Europe, reflect symbolic abstraction. Whether representing fertility, identity, or social meaning, they demonstrate shared symbolic frameworks across wide distances. Humans also adapted to environmental extremes. In Arctic regions, survival required precise understanding of seasonal cycles and animal behavior. Coastal populations developed fishing technologies, including barbed harpoons and fishhooks made from bone. Inland groups refined large-game hunting strategies, coordinating drives and ambushes. Mobility remained central. Even as technological complexity increased, early humans did not settle permanently in large numbers. Seasonal camps were common, but year-round sedentary villages remained rare before the advent of agriculture. Movement preserved ecological balance and reduced resource depletion. Cognitive capacity did not evolve dramatically during this period. It was already present. What changed was accumulated knowledge. Each generation inherited survival techniques from the previous one. Innovation spread gradually through contact. Cultural evolution moved faster than biological evolution. The crossing of the world was not dramatic in the moment. There were no maps marking progress, no awareness of continental expansion. A group moved because game had moved. A coastline curved and revealed new land. A river led farther than expected. Over thousands of years, those small decisions reshaped the species' distribution. Humans became a global presence not through conquest, but through persistence and adaptability. They followed rivers, they crossed plains, they navigated coasts, they endured ice and heat, they adjusted clothing, tools, and diet to suit new landscapes. By the end of the last ice age, humans had established themselves on nearly every major landmass. The world was still largely wild, but it was no longer entirely unfamiliar. The journey outward had been gradual, unplanned in totality, yet profound in outcome. And still, life remained fundamentally the same. Small groups, mobile camps, shared labor, firelight at night, and knowledge passed through memory rather than text. The earth had been crossed, but civilization had not yet begun. The turning of the earth. For nearly 300,000 years, human life had followed a familiar pattern: movement, cooperation, seasonal adaptation, and intimate knowledge of land. Then, gradually, in several different parts of the world, something shifted. It did not happen in a single year, nor in a single location. It unfolded slowly, over centuries, almost quietly. Around 12,000 years ago, at the close of the last ice age, global climate began to stabilize. Temperatures warmed, glaciers retreated, rainfall patterns became more predictable. Regions that had once been harsh and unstable grew more fertile. Grasslands expanded. Wild cereals flourished in parts of the Near East. In what is now known as the Fertile Crescent, an arc stretching from modern-day Iraq through Syria and into Israel and Jordan, early human groups encountered abundant stands of wild wheat and barley. For generations, these plants had been gathered naturally. Seeds were harvested, ground into flour using stone querns, and consumed seasonally. At some point, gathering shifted toward cultivation. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Abu Huraira and Jericho indicates that humans began deliberately planting seeds near campsites. This was not an instant transformation into farming, but an experimental phase. Seeds that fell near dwellings were noticed. Growth patterns were observed. Gradually, intentional sowing replaced pure foraging in certain regions. The Natufian culture, dating to roughly 14,000 to 11,500 years ago in the Levant, provides early evidence of semi-sedentary life. Stone-built circular dwellings suggest longer stays in one location. Grinding stones indicate systematic processing of grains. Yet hunting and gathering continued alongside early cultivation. Agriculture did not appear everywhere at once. In China, rice cultivation emerged independently along the Yangtze River basin. In Mesoamerica, maize was domesticated from wild teosinte thousands of years later. In New Guinea, taro and yams were cultivated in highland regions. These developments occurred separately, shaped by local ecosystems and available species. Domestication required patience. Wild wheat shatters easily, dispersing seeds before harvest. Through selective harvesting of plants with less brittle stalks, early farmers unintentionally guided genetic changes. Over generations, cultivated crops differed from their wild ancestors. Larger grains, sturdier stems, more predictable yields. The same gradual process occurred with animals. Sheep and goats were among the earliest domesticated species in the Near East, followed by cattle and pigs. Rather than hunting entire herds, humans began managing breeding patterns, protecting animals from predators, and culling selectively. The shift toward agriculture altered mobility. When crops required tending, movement became limited. Fields anchored people to place. Seasonal migration slowed. Permanent or semi-permanent villages formed. Storage pits and granaries appeared in the archaeological record. Food surplus allowed population growth. This surplus had consequences. In mobile hunter-gatherer societies, possessions were limited by what could be carried. In agricultural communities, goods accumulated. Clay vessels stored grain. Stone walls marked boundaries. Ownership became more tangible. With ownership came dispute. Population density increased. Villages grew into towns. Labor specialization emerged. Not every individual needed to gather food directly. Some focused on tool production, pottery, construction, or ritual activity. Social complexity deepened. Yet this transformation was not immediate or universal. For thousands of years, agricultural and hunter-gatherer societies coexisted. In many regions, hunting and gathering remained dominant. Agriculture required stable climate and suitable species. It was not inherently superior. It was adaptive under specific conditions. Early agricultural settlements were modest. Jericho, one of the oldest known proto-cities, dates back to around 9000 BCE. Its stone tower and defensive walls suggest organized communal effort. But these early settlements were still small by modern standards. Life changed gradually. Diet narrowed in many farming communities, relying heavily on staple crops. Skeletal evidence suggests early agriculturalists sometimes experienced more nutritional stress compared to diverse hunter-gatherer diets. Yet agriculture supported higher birth rates and sustained larger populations. Writing had not yet appeared. Metal tools were still thousands of years away, but the foundations of civilization were forming. Permanence, storage, domestication, territory. This shift did not erase the deep history that preceded it. For over 95% of human existence, we had lived as mobile hunter-gatherers. Agriculture represented a recent experiment in comparison to the long continuity of foraging life. Even as villages formed, ancient habits remained. Firelight still gathered communities at night. Oral tradition still preserved memory. Knowledge of seasons still determined survival. The transition to agriculture was not a sudden leap forward. It was a gradual turning of the earth, from movement toward settlement, from observation toward cultivation. In different corners of the world, humans made similar choices without contact. They experimented with seeds, noticed patterns, and slowly reshaped their relationship with land. Over time, those small decisions compounded. Permanent dwellings became towns. Towns became cities. Trade expanded beyond regional exchange into long-distance networks. Social hierarchies formalized. Writing systems emerged in Mesopotamia around 3000 BCE to record transactions and ownership. But beneath these visible developments, the older story remained embedded within us. For tens of thousands of years, humans survived without walls, without borders, without fields to defend. We lived in small bands under open skies, guided by stars, seasons, and memory. Agriculture changed the scale of human life, but not its core nature. The instincts that sustained early humans, cooperation, adaptability, observation, remained necessary. Farming required collective effort. Irrigation demanded planning. Settlement required trust and coordination. Civilization did not replace early humanity. It layered upon it. When we look back at early humans, we are not observing a primitive version of ourselves. We are seeing the longest chapter of our own story, a chapter defined by resilience, environmental intelligence, and shared survival. Before writing, before cities, before history was recorded, humans lived within the world rather than upon it. And in that long span of time, before the first fields were planted, the foundations of everything that followed had already been quietly laid.